Hello everyone and welcome to another Top Tips for Archaeology graduates. Today I'm joined by Robin, who is a solicitor. Hi Robin, how are you?
Hi, very good, thank you.
Well, thank you for making the time to come and talk to us today. Maybe you could talk a little bit through the role and the job as a solicitor.
Yeah, absolutely. It won't be the same for everyone, but with my particular little area, mine's incredibly varied. I'm in planning law, which is all aspects of town and country planning and development and reuse of buildings, whether even historic buildings, listed buildings, trying to develop things in slightly tricky areas, conservation areas, and how do you do it in a way that's going to be actually sensitive to its surroundings and things like issues like that. So mine's incredibly varied. But the profession itself is also just incredibly varied within itself. If you're a solicitor who's working in mergers and acquisitions or banking, you'll be just doing that kind of transactional work. But if you're on the kind of the contentious side, then you'll be doing criminal law or major disputes work, and that's going to be incredibly varied in its own right. So I would say it can be an incredibly diverse profession. But yes, mine can be very varied in its own right. So on a morning, I could be potentially trying to work out how to make a big shiny office building acceptable to the council and give the local community all the things that they want to make this building work for them. But then on the afternoon, I could just as easily be working with a community group trying to stop a housing estate being built in someone's back garden. So yeah, it's amazingly diverse. Yeah.
And you said there you work in sort of planning law, so that's interesting coming from sort of an archaeological perspective. Do you feel like it's related to archaeology? Are you doing things around sort of the kind of conservation of buildings and things like that sort of we discuss and debate in class?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a strange one, because when I was first trying to get into law, people kind of looked at it and kind of put, oh, you've come from archaeology, I don't see how we're going to law with that. But to me, it seems it seems it's a crossover that makes sense to me. So with my with the background of doing the undergrad at York, I then did an MA in building conservation with Navin Piplani, and it was. I was always fascinated on the building side. I was always interested, whether it was a castle or a pyramid. I was always intrigued by the building side of things. So to me, it just seemed a natural progression that I'd be interested in working with buildings, and stepping into law seems sensible. But I appreciate that to a lot of people that does seem a strange jump, but it wasn't to me. But yeah. I think that's because I had that specialism in mind. I think maybe if you are looking into a different area of law, then perhaps it could seem a bigger jump, I think.
Yeah. So can I ask, what do you enjoy about your job, and what do you perhaps find more challenging about the role?
It's an interesting one. I think it suits. I think being a solicitor, especially in kind of like a central London city firm, it doesn't suit every personality type. And for me, it sounds awful to say, but I think I revel in the kind of, the kind of person that you walk past on the Millennium Bridge holding a coffee, yelling into their hands free, like there's some kind of like wannabe apprentice candidate. Yeah, great, I love that, brilliant, sign me up. So it seemed kind of it's that aspect of being at the hub of activity and being kind of where everything is happening is really attractive to me. And I know that's not the case for everyone, but to me it is. And for people like me, it gives you a feel of kind of really making things happen, buildings going up that you go, oh yes, I've worked on that one, that's one of mine. That's quite a nice feeling. It's quite rewarding, I think.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that, because I think sometimes in archaeology we can see ourselves as quite distant from, perhaps, as you say, like the energy and making things happen that happen in the city, London city. We can sometimes see that as quite distant from archaeology, but actually having that basis to understand buildings in that way, we entirely contribute to that. And I think we shouldn't be scared of making a foot into that world. And for you to say you get a lot of energy from that and enjoy it, I really understand where you're coming from with that. Like, it must feel incredible to see a building that you've been involved with go up. Can I ask about what you do find more challenging? I think with these interviews, it's nice to hear from people some of the different kinds of areas that people find about their jobs, do find challenging about their jobs, because not everything is 100% excellent and exciting all the time. Sometimes you do have to do things that are a little bit more challenging.
Absolutely, yeah. For me, I think the main challenge is, well, you've got the traditional challenges, which are, for instance, it's a competitive area with lots expected of you. You're working quite long hours. You're trying to juggle what the client's asking of you, but simultaneously what various partners in your law firm are asking of you. So there's that side of things, but there's also on the kind of I suppose the moral side, actually, there are some challenges. I mean, as a lawyer, I don't have much input into actually whether that's the right thing to do, and sometimes I'll be working on the side of the transaction that I might not necessarily agree with. So there's been times where you'll be working on a scheme that is architecturally awful, and may potentially destroy the very kind of the very things that I would seek to protect, and it would destroy the archaeology in an area. That can be a bit of a challenge. There's definitely been cases and clients where I thought, I've sold my soul here. I'm working for the bad guy, which is a bit more difficult.
That is an incredibly honest answer. One of the things, so for people that I know who work in law, particularly who work in criminal law, talk about the necessity of law taking place and that supporting that system. And sometimes you might do things that you feel, I'm defending someone who I am sure is not someone who should get off for this crime. They're guilty. I think they're guilty. And morally that's challenging. But the broader practice of everyone having that right and supporting the legal process, I find a lot of satisfaction from. And I think that's the challenge of doing work, which is on the one hand incredibly important, but also at that high level of law where you are taking along a lot of responsibility and being involved in big projects. And I think that's sometimes the case for my work as well. As an academic, you have aspirations of what you'd like to achieve, and sometimes the compromises of the research that you're doing can sometimes feel like there are moral questions. And I think that's really interesting part of work to reflect on and certainly to discuss. So can I ask how you went about moving from your master's in buildings conservation and into the legal side and into the role as a solicitor?
So after completing the master's degree, I'd been kind of focusing in on one, buildings, but two, actually, my MA dissertation actually looked at the legislation that we use to protect our heritage, how it was changing, and whether or not those changes were actually going to benefit the protection of listed buildings, conservation areas, and what have you. So in order to do that, I actually spent a little placement at the time, English Heritage. But that was the first time that I'd worked alongside solicitors, and kind of got kind of a little view into kind of, oh right, okay, there are kind of a lot of other jobs that I wasn't aware of that are related to what I'm interested in, and kind of seeing a little bit of that kind of cut and thrust, which perhaps had been, I think that cut and thrust seemed very attractive, especially when a lot of my other previous work experience had say been at local authorities where perhaps the pace is a little bit slower. That seemed very attractive, and then from that point it was a case of trying to get as much kind of relevant experience as I possibly could in kind of the legal area, which itself I would say is a challenge, because it's incredibly competitive to to even not even just to get trained as a solicitor, but to get a vacation placement or a back scheme, as they call them, to get those placements to then with a view to getting the training contract. So it's it's a case of just trying to get as much experience as at that point to then kind of stand you in the best stead to land a training contract. That's the way in. But what I would say on that is that I actually felt that I had to hide my interests at that point, because what I found was that unless you know a partner who has an interest in the things that you're interested in, 99 times out of 100, you're going into the kind of the HR meat grinder, and they will look at all your exam results and all of your experience. And I found that pushing my interest in a particular area didn't actually bring me that much success. I had to pretend that I was a kind of an all-rounder with an interest in commercial law, property, potentially kind of a bit of M&A or anything. I was having to pretend that I was interested in everything in order to get my foot in the door. Only once I got my foot in the door could I really be honest and say, no, I'm not interested in any of that. I want to be a planning lawyer. And that's a bit of a strange one, but it's definitely something that I would kind of signpost to somebody who's come from the same background, who's looking to transition into law.
That's really useful advice. I guess it's kind of obvious advice in some respects, in that when people are looking for placements, they want someone who's an all-rounder, who's got that open mind to all of the different aspects of law. But actually your background has then given you kind of the areas to specialise in once you've got that first kind of steps and understanding. I think we'd probably be the same in archaeology, actually. We want students to come in with an open mind of the different areas of archaeology they're interested in and learn about it and be open to learning about it, and then narrow it down once they've had a chance to get to know it a little bit more. Can I ask, so you've focused in on an area of law which very much relates to your archaeological interests. How do you feel the degrees that you're really were useful to you, I guess, both in terms of the specific knowledges and work around planning, but also some of those transferable skills as well?
Yeah, well, I suppose harking back to a previous kind of answer that we've chatted about, that this kind of archaeology to law crossover isn't seen as a kind of an obvious direction of travel, which is strange, really, because I think history to law is seen as possibly the most traditional and direct kind of a route into law, and apart from somebody just doing a straight law degree and going into law, which I think is quite an interesting distinction, because I think, as much as in archaeology we like to differentiate ourselves from the historians, I think there are areas in which we share, certainly, whether it's a case of our own investigation, being rational in the way you approach a body of evidence, having kind of primary and secondary evidence and trying to weigh those up, and then effectively coming up with your own submissions. There are massive overlaps, and to me, the archaeology gives you the skills that give me the skills that I'm using every day as a lawyer, basically.
Yeah, I think that's a very good answer. When I'm feeling particularly uncharitable to historians, I see them as studying a very minor part of archaeology, and we study all of it, and they select a little part of it, and that's what they research. But that's when I'm feeling uncharitable. Our colleagues in history obviously have a lot of crossover, and that kind of evidential reasoning, I think, that you've picked up on there is really a unique skill that comes from the historical subjects, whether that's under history or under archaeology. And so we do see quite a lot of students going to law, and I imagine, like you, they've had to kind of negotiate, saying archaeology is has those crossovers with other forms of subjects such as history. So to end this interview, can I ask you, what are your top tips? So if students are watching this and they're thinking, yes, law is a route I'd like to take, perhaps even a solicitor or planning law, what kind of advice, what are your top tips you'd like to have gone back and given yourself when you first graduated?
I think it's never too early to get started. Because of how competitive it is, you want as much on that CV as possible. And I think the best way to view building up your CV is you've got to view it as kind of rungs on a ladder. And if you've had a couple of days in a law firm, that'll help you to get a week in a law firm, and that'll help you to get a placement, and that'll help you to get a training contract. And you can't, unless you have, unless you've got absolutely incredible grades, a brilliant CV, you can't jump those rungs. So start straight away and get on that bottom rung of the ladder and build up your experience. And there's other ways you can get that experience. So, I didn't have, fantastic straight A's at A level, but I built up that experience step by step, and I fitted in other bits and pieces. I worked 1 day a week at the Citizens Advice Bureau for a year, and it's unpaid work, but it's the best work you could be doing, really, in terms of what you're allowed to do. You just unleashed on the public with very little training or experience. And put out there to help them with their legal problems. So I'd recommend getting involved with the Citizens Advice, and just stepping up each rung of the ladder and getting onto it as soon as you can, really.
That's fantastic advice, not just for law, but for other areas as well. That sense that it's a little bit is starts the chain reaction, and that's where you need to begin. Thank you so much, Robin, for taking the time to join us today, and thank you everybody out there for watching. Join us again next time for more top tips for archaeology graduates.